Your body fat percentage and distribution are far more important than your weight. Obesity reduces life expectancy by 5 to 20 years. If you notice, this is a very wide range. What defines that one obesity is more problematic than another. Many factors, such as the person's muscle mass or the distribution of that fat. Yes, where that fat is, because it doesn't always distribute the same way. The accumulation of fat in visceral compartments influences the risk of type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, and cardiovascular disease, regardless of weight. Today, you're going to understand how. Concerning your personal fat storage is, what types of fats there are, how they are distributed, and more practically, how to accurately measure your body fat. You know far less about fat than you believe. We've managed to make the public think that fat is an inert and stupid anatomical element, that it's just a source of fuel, the tank of your car. This is a big mistake. There isn't just one type of fat cell. There are at least 3. We call them white, brown, or beige adipocytes. The first one has a high capacity to store fat and a low capacity to generate heat. The last one is the opposite, while the brown one has intermediate properties. It's a bit like with fast, slow, and mixed fibers in skeletal muscle. One line of research in obesity is looking to stimulate the formation of more brown and beige fat to expend more energy. What types of fat exist according to their distribution? We have 3 types of fat in terms of where it is deposited. The one that the fitness and beauty industry attacks is subcutaneous fat, which in turn is divided into superficial and deep subcutaneous fat. It's the one you can see and touch. The one that jiggles when you slap it, and in humans it usually accumulates in the abdomen, hips, and thighs. Then we have visceral fat divided into omental fat, which hangs like a bib from the stomach to the liver, protecting internal organs, and mesenteric fat, which is found between the intestinal loops. Finally, we have ectopic fat, which is located in other organs and tissues that shouldn't have much fat, like the heart, pancreas, or muscle. Do you think it's good for the heart to have a lot of fat? Well, you're right, it's very bad. And you might ask, why do I need to know all this? The most important thing is that you understand this concept. There is a limited capacity for lipid storage in the subcutaneous compartment. This capacity varies from person to person. I repeat, you can't store all the fat you want under the skin in the subcutaneous tissue. You may have a low capacity to store fat, and your neighbor may have a very high one. That's why people who reach 500 or 600 kilos are wonders of nature. Not all of us have the capacity to do that. Something similar happens with the genetic capacity to gain muscle mass. And what happens when we reach our genetic limit? When we approach or reach that personal and physiological limit, we spill fat into other compartments, such as the visceral and ectopic. These last 2 are the ones that generate most of the diseases related to obesity, because having subcutaneous fat is much less dangerous to health than having visceral and ectopic fat. The problem is, subcutaneous fat is clearly visible, but visceral and ectopic fat go completely unnoticed and can only be known with the techniques I'm going to tell you about in today's video. Borja, what is the healthy fat percentage? Adiposity varies greatly from person to person, life stage, ethnicities, and of course, there is also a clear difference between sexes. For example, Asians and Africans tolerate having more body fat much worse and develop type 2 diabetes earlier and more severely compared to Europeans. Indigenous Aborigines quickly develop metabolic diseases when they switch from eating food they are adapted to eating Western junk food. For easy to remember figures, although not exact, for an adult male, a body fat percentage between 10 and 20% is healthy, which does not mean that there are not males with 7, 8 or 9% body fat who are healthy, or even with 22. In women, we move more in the range of between 15 and 25% body fat, because you genetically tend to accumulate more fat for reproductive purposes. Another difference between men and women is that we tend to generate more visceral fat and less subcutaneous fat, which is a clear disadvantage and is behind the higher cardiovascular risk in men, although this evens out after menopause. Now, if my weight is not very useful, as we said at the beginning, how do I measure my body fat percentage? Anthropometric measurements. Anthropometric measurements and indices are the easiest to use. They are useful but limited. The most famous one you've likely used before. It's the body mass index. It's the worst way to estimate body fat. Why? Because it doesn't measure body fat. It's a numerical value calculated from height and weight. The conceptual basis of obesity is generated based on body mass index, as remember that we consider obesity as a body mass index greater than 30 kilograms per square meter. Here we face the foundations of the current problem in the definition and research on obesity. Why? Because we define obesity using an inaccurate parameter that doesn't tell us about the amount and distribution of fat. The body mass index is easy to do, but it correlates poorly with health problems if we compare it with the waist-hip ratio or the sagittal abdominal diameter that I will explain now. It also ignores crucial factors like the quantity of lean mass or the distribution of fat that we have mentioned. Therefore, body mass index should only be used in conjunction with other techniques as a complement. Waist-hip ratio is easy to measure and better than body mass index for estimating cardiometabolic risk. Implementing the technique is not always easy, as you have to measure the waist at the level of the navel with the belly relaxed and the tape measure without tension. For men, a waist-hip ratio above 0.95 indicates a higher risk of cardiometabolic problems, and for women this figure is above 0.85. Sagittal abdominal diameter. It's a stronger alternative to the previous two, but rarely used. It measures the anteroposterior diameter of the abdomen. The patient lies down on a firm surface and bends their knees to 90 degrees to avoid arching their back. During exhalation, measure the distance from the lumbar region to the highest point of the abdomen at navel level. It is the anthropometric measurement that has shown the strongest association with visceral adiposity in this recent study. So, if you want to estimate your visceral fat, this is the simplest way to do it without any major expense or complexity. All you need is a tape measure. We should aim for it to be less than 25 centimeters in men and less than 20 centimeters in women. Study of skin folds, plicometry. The study of skin folds is a widely used and accessible method to estimate the percentage of body fat. It involves measuring the thickness of skin folds at various specific and standardized points on the body using a special caliper called a plicometer or skin fold caliper. These measurements allow estimating the amount of subcutaneous fat, which can then be correlated with the total percentage of body fat using standardized equations. The main problem is that the technique needs to be learned, which is not easily reproducible. Well, beyond anthropometric measurements, we have techniques that estimate body composition, the amount and distribution of lean mass, mainly muscle, adipose tissue, and bone. These are the most interesting. Impedance. How does it work? First, you step onto a kind of scale with electrodes that are in contact with your feet and sometimes also with your hands. That's why you have to take off your socks. Next, an imperceptible electric current passes through your body and your tissues, measuring the impedance, that is, the resistance generated by different tissues to the passage of that current. Electricity moves differently through water than fat. It's popularly known as TANITA, but this is just the most famous brand of bioimpedance, and of course there are many others. It's simple to use, portable, inexpensive, and estimates body fat percentage. The main problem is that there is a lot of variability from one device to another. Hydration changes greatly affect the result, even those resulting from the menstrual cycle, and in more severe obesity, the accuracy is reduced. The so-called octapolar, 2 electrodes for each hand and foot, are much more reliable. It is by far the most used to measure body composition for its safety, ease of use, and price. However, it is not the most accurate. Total body plethysmography or BOPOD. This technique measures the volume of air displaced by a person inside a closed compartment to assess mass and volume. It thus estimates body density, which is used to determine the percentage of body fat by applying density equations such as the Siri equation or the Brozek equation, which convert body density into percentage of body fat. It's quick and easy to do, and it also estimates the distribution of fat, but it requires non-portable and specialized equipment. Furthermore, bone mineral density, temperature, relative humidity, hair quantity, and hydration level affect the results. That's why it's uncommon. Dual energy X-ray absorptiometry. In this technique, low doses of X-rays are used to generate a 2D anatomical representation from which body composition is estimated. It's very accurate and provides information about the distribution of fat. It's the gold standard for measuring bone mineral density. You may have heard of densitometry. This is it. If you have osteopenia or osteoporosis, you've definitely experienced this before. As drawbacks, it adds some ionizing radiation, although very little. The equipment may be incompatible with more severe obesity and it is not portable. There are interferences with the patient's positioning and whether or not they move while the test is being done, just like an X-ray. Another major disadvantage is that it does not measure ectopic fat, CT computed tomography. The CT is like the dual energy X-ray absorptiometry, but using many more X-ray images to generate a very detailed and complete 3D anatomical model. And it's no different from the CT scan you get for the diagnosis of other medical problems. It has high accuracy and measures both visceral and subcutaneous fat effectively. However, it is expensive, and most importantly, it adds high levels of ionizing radiation. It should not be done in children or other at-risk groups. In my opinion, a diagnostic technique should not cause harm when there are alternatives, so I don't even consider it a valid option. Nuclear magnetic resonance uses powerful magnetic fields to generate a highly precise 3D anatomical model. It also measures fat in all body compartments very accurately. As a clear advantage over CT, it does not add ionizing radiation. However, it is costly, not suitable for self-use, interferes with implants like pacemakers and cochlear devices, and is limited to clinical trials rather than daily use. In conclusion, now you know what options you have to accurately estimate your fat percentage. If you have never gone beyond your weight measured on the scale, starting to know your body mass index, waist-hip index, and especially sagittal abdominal diameter is more than interesting. However, we shouldn't stop there. These would be screening measures, basic ones that give us an idea of your risk and whether or not you need to prioritize getting your act together. After learning about anthropometric measures, if what you want is to have a tool at home to regularly estimate your fat percentage, bioimpedance is the easiest to use and acquire. The octapolar ones, remember, are much more accurate, but yes, more expensive. For cross-checking and comparing, it would also be very good to occasionally get a dual energy X-ray absorptiometry scan to analyze body composition. Many specialized centers already offer it. And as the icing on the cake, and if you ever have the opportunity, a nuclear magnetic resonance is by far the most accurate and complete method, although obviously limited to clinics and hospitals. If you found this video helpful, comment below. And I remind you that you have the online consultation available in case it can help you. Thanks for staying until the end. See you in the next video, a big hug, and keep empowering.